Thank you, Lucy. The recording has started. We have over 100 staff and more than 100 projects running at any given time. Myself and Lucy, we work in the communities team at CSE, and our roles are really about building the capacity and supporting community organisations, whether that be village halls to schools to scout groups, community energy groups, all sorts, to help them take action on energy in their local communities. So the project that we are sort of coming from today is the Energy Learning Network. And this is all about sort of powering forward community energy projects across the UK. So this webinar forms part of that project, which is a partnership project. And we are partnering with Community Energy Wales, Community Energy Scotland, Community Energy England, and Action Renewables in Northern Ireland to deliver a series of webinars and resources, case studies to kind of bring insights and resources and help connect community organisations looking to do local energy projects. Our role at CSE within the Energy Learning Network is particularly around broadening the sector and supporting new entrants from a non-energy or non-community energy audience to sort of get involved and learn about what they can do on energy in their local communities. So today's webinar is a sort of a new one in a series. So we were delivering some earlier in the year and last year, and we took a bit of a break, and we've got this one and another one coming up in the autumn as well. So I'll explain a bit more about kind of future events towards the end of today's session. So just to also note that this is a UK-wide event, and I know we've got some people coming from Scotland and Wales. So we're going to cover aspects that are relevant across the UK. But if you want to get some more support and focus more on your kind of geographic area, definitely get in touch with our partners like Community Energy Scotland, Community Energy Wales, to see what how they can help you in your country and what events they're running. Great. So with that, I'm going to crack on, and first going to start off by providing a little bit of context as to why, why we're here today talking about energy efficiency and community building. So a bit of setting the scene and providing that background. So unfortunately, some pretty scary images to start off with, but the rest of the session will be hopeful, I promise. So the reason why we're all here today and why we're thinking about energy efficiency is because we are facing a climate crisis. We're seeing this all over the world and in the UK through floods, storms, droughts, and more hottest days on record. We know the science is clear. This is happening because of greenhouse gas emissions that we are putting into the atmosphere. This is happening because we're burning fossil fuels to power our lives and society. At the same time, we're also facing an ongoing cost of living crisis, pushing more and more people into fuel poverty who are struggling to afford to heat their homes to a safe and comfortable level in the winter, and increasingly so keeping cool in the summers. All of this is affecting the resilience of our communities, something that I'm sure as community organisations you are acutely aware of. And all of this is happening in a time where communities are facing cuts to services and community organisations are struggling to resource their really crucial local services with that growing demand. So why are we thinking about this in the context of buildings? So a large proportion of our greenhouse gas emissions in the UK come from our buildings, from the energy that we use to heat and power the residential, commercial and community sector. So you can see that through the pie chart there on the screen, that 17% of our greenhouse gas emissions comes from residential, 18% business, and that would include community buildings, which kind of sit a bit awkwardly in the middle. Currently, we have one of the most inefficient building stocks in Europe. This means our buildings are wasting a lot of energy. So to support the UK's decarbonisation efforts and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, we must improve our existing buildings to reduce the overall energy demand. At the same time, we also know we need to move away from fossil fuels and install technologies that help us with this and provide low carbon or renewable forms of heating and electricity. But, and really importantly, it's not all about carbon. There's many co-benefits of doing this work. such as providing cleaner air, cheaper bills, and comfortable buildings for the users of our buildings, but also for staff and volunteers. And really importantly is the sort of reduced running costs that it could have for community buildings to help them fund kind of those crucial activities for local communities. So why are community buildings so important, and why we at CSE do a lot of work with community buildings? As we know, because we speak to communities all the time, that there is a sort of appetite to respond to the climate crisis, but also to ensure that we're doing this in a fair way and also supporting people that are struggling in the cost of living crisis. Community buildings offer essential local services, many of which you'll be supporting yourselves coming here today, but things like food banks and warm hubs and key kind of community activities. We're also seeing increasingly that community spaces are acting as places of refuge during climate impacts. You know, if there's sort of local floods or cold snaps, they might act as warm hubs and things like that. We can also see in community organisations that take action on their buildings. This can often be a gateway to other community action on energy and climate change, empowering communities to do something in their local area. But they also pose a significant challenge for decarbonisation, because lots of community buildings are very complex and have multiple uses. They come in all shapes and sizes, some of them more akin to like a residential home, to some of them being like massive buildings with different types of materials being used and different extensions. It's very complicated for retrofitting, which we'll kind of come to see in this presentation. And that makes it all an interesting emerging area for investors and funders and communities. The stat here says that 3 in 5 community buildings in the most deprived areas in England do not reach basic energy efficiency needs. And we know that that's a similar pattern in the other nations as well. Before we run through the options for community buildings, I wanted to go through some of the key terms that exist in this space to kind of clarify what they mean. So first of all is retrofit, because you'll hear this term a fair amount. And this is about any improvement work on an existing building to improve its energy efficiency, making them healthier to live in and easier to heat, able to retain that heat for longer, and replacing fossil fuels with clean, renewable energy. And it matters because, as we've just discussed, we're facing the two major challenges of soaring energy costs and the urgent need to cut our carbon emissions. Retrofitting our existing buildings is a crucial solution for both of these issues. So we also know that we need to make sure that our new builds are energy efficient, and that's definitely important. But we have so many existing buildings, old, not so old, across the country, and we need to make sure that we are addressing those. So a few kind of key principles to bear in mind when you're thinking about retrofit. First of all is to do no harm. This means not jumping in to add things to your building before you understand how it works. It also means removing things that may be causing issues before making additions. The next one is repair and maintenance, and we'll come back to this a lot in today's presentation. This is just a really important thing to consider, which is just simply maintaining your building as a key way to start to increase both thermal comfort and the fuel efficiency of the building. It allows the building to work as effectively as possible. So a properly maintained building could save up to 40% in energy consumption. The energy hierarchy, which we'll talk a bit more about in the next slide, this just means getting the order in which you do things right. So thinking about what are the sort of easy wins, low cost things that you can do first, such as changing your energy behaviors to reduce your energy use before kind of undertaking those big expensive measures in the building, such as replacing your heating system or installing renewables and things like that. So by doing it in the correct order, you will know what size of system or type of technology to install and make the most of that investment. Next one is the whole house approach, or the whole building approach in the case of community buildings. And this is just about recognizing that buildings work as a whole. They don't just work as a sort of interconnected, sort of disconnected parts. So it's good to kind of reflect on how heat and moisture move around the whole building rather than just addressing kind of one room at a time. The next is assessment and monitoring. So this helps to sort of build that understanding of the whole building, and also understanding that every building is different. No two buildings are used or operate in the same way. So knowing how you use your building and where changes will have the most impact is a really important kind of starting point for any retrofit works. So we'll talk about this in a bit, but things like smart meters can help kind of monitor the energy usage of the building and log that, but also air quality monitors to sort of see where the air quality might not be so good across the building. And finally, fabric first, which has a bit of a controversial kind of standing in the world of retrofit. It's a really commonly used term that you'll hear in retrofit, and that seems to mean different things to different people. So we at CSE and many in the sector want to sort of point out that it doesn't mean that we need to cover all of our buildings in thick insulation before we can consider a new heating system, for example. But it does mean making suitable, targeted, appropriate improvements to increase the thermal comfort and efficiency of the building. So the energy hierarchy, as mentioned before, is the sort of order in which you might consider doing stuff to your building. The first step really is to think about behavior change to use less energy where appropriate, use more energy efficient appliances, think about kind of the times of the day that you're using energy and whether that can kind of shift. The next is you might think about carrying out targeted fabric improvements, and that can include repair and maintenance, but also things like insulation. And then you might think about installing low carbon heating or hot water sources, and finally, renewable energy generation. The order in which you do things is really important, as it will be more cost effective if you do that in that order. Essentially, what this means is that before you start making changes to the building fabric and systems, you should first understand how energy is used and limit the use where possible. The reason this is important is that the changes made and new systems added will be done appropriately for the building. So you'll get a heat pump that's sized for the exact energy use that you need for the building, and the right number of solar panels will be added for kind of maximum benefit. So we're going to run through a few kind of options and things to consider for community buildings specifically. The first step really is to build a picture of your building and understand kind of what your starting point is. And this is something, we've worked with community buildings for many years, and often you have sort of managers or building managers that sort of come and go, and there is very little kind of understanding of how the building has actually been used over time, how that's changed, any history of works that's happened. So it's good to sort of compile that information and start understanding where your starting point is. A few questions you could ask is how the building is being used, when and where does the building feel comfortable or uncomfortable. Engaging kind of users of the building in that process can be helpful because they might have feedback that you're unaware of. So if you're renting out any spaces to community groups, using it for yoga or baby groups, getting their sort of feedback on the comfortableness of that room. And then it's what is the condition of the building, and are there any repair issues? And if there's any history of works having been done on the building. This is important because if you're kind of doing any major new installations like of insulation, contractors will probably want to know what's happened before to make sure that they're using the right materials and they're not sort of putting anything on any existing works that might have any previous issues. Next is how much energy is being used and when. So gathering actual energy use data by taking regular meter readings, or if you've got a smart meter, accessing kind of online account to show that. And then thinking about monitoring the air quality and temperature of different rooms and doing things like air tightness and thermal imaging assessments to see if where you've got drafts or where there are particular areas of heat loss. Really good idea to engage building users in this process, not just to get their feedback where that seems appropriate, but also to help them to start to buy into the whole process, and eventually if there's any measures that are going to be done that need kind of funding, that they're kind of engaged in that. And it's a useful education tool to help people to understand maybe what they might want to do for their own homes. doing an energy audit of your building will help you to work through these questions. CSE do have a free downloadable DIY energy survey, which you can use. I think if you've got a relatively simple community building, like a one space or village hall or something like that, using our survey could be a good starting point. If you have any questions about it, you can email us. And if you have a more complex building, we really recommend probably paying for an energy audit or getting some kind of professional support, potentially through a community energy organization, for example. So it's really important to do this to establish that baseline, actually develop an informed action plan, but also to monitor your impact. So if you then made some changes, kind of going back to the survey and looking to see how that's impacted and what changes have happened. So maintenance first, we've mentioned this before and we'll mention it many times because it is really important to consider and something that's often sort of not really made important in the funding world. So often you can get grants for things like solar panels and a new heat pump or insulation, but a bit harder. We're really advocating for the importance of repair and maintenance in the sort of funding world, and this is really key. Most, if not all, buildings will have defects, including new ones. So identifying and understanding the underlying causes of issues if in a building is vital before considering improvement works. This is really important because it can help retain the value of the building, but also minor repair costs little, but if left unchecked, that can end up costing a lot more. We're also seeing increased kind of impacts of climate change and the strain that has on buildings, particularly buildings that are exposed to wind and rain. It's important because you have a duty of care to ensure that the environment is safe for the users of the building. And it helps to preserve the building for many years to come, which is really important if you want the asset to continue delivering those crucial services into the future. Problems with the fabric, such as cracks or things that allow moisture to come in, can cause damp and mold issues, and this can be unhealthy for the air quality and for the sort of users of the building. But it also can lead to more heat loss from damp, cold surfaces, which in turn increases heating costs. So sort of dealing with that is really important. And then uncovering maintenance issues later on, but like after you've already started doing kind of major works to the building, could cause delays and add costs to those works. So it's a good idea to really kind of consider this beforehand. So once you start to build that picture of your building and understand a bit more about its condition, you can create a maintenance plan. And that could simply be a list of those issues and the steps that you're going to need to take to address them. And it might be things that are relatively easy, like just getting your boiler serviced, but it might be things like repairing kind of window and door frame cracks or fixing leaky blocked gutters. Generally, what we kind of promote at CSE is to renovate and repair before replacing. So it might be tempting to sort of get a whole new window fitted. But generally, it's a good idea to try, if it's appropriate and it's not too much in disrepair, is to renovate the sort of window frame. And this is because like getting a whole replacement actually has quite high embodied carbon, but also it might cost quite a lot to do when you could achieve what you need just by renovating and repairing. So the next step that you want to think about is just those low cost behavior change or sort of simple measures that you can do. And they generally really good to get you started and can make a difference. They're also good because they're easy wins and they sort of keep that momentum going before you start thinking about those kind of larger, more scary measures that you need to fund. So things like draft proofing or efficient lighting, putting signage for the users of the building so that they can understand where to reduce energy use, understanding heating controls, fitting things like heavy curtains and shutters and stuff like that can be good options. And then once you've looked at those steps, you might think about addressing the fabric of the building through insulation. This can really have a big impact on heat loss. The appropriate options will really depend on your building type, the materials that's being used, geographic location and exposure. So it's crucial to understand that the viability of insulation and which materials are going to work really depends on those factors. It's really important to understand to ensure a balance between having enough insulation, but also enough ventilation so that moisture does not build up and cause any damp issues. Generally, continuous insulation is better. You want to avoid having gaps in the insulation. So in this picture on the slide, this is a thermal image of a ceiling. The dark patches is where there is heat loss, and that's where there's gaps in the insulation in the roof and the ceiling, which can allow more heat loss to happen than the insulated areas. So if you've got gaps, there can be a lot more heat loss. So it's a good idea to, if you're thinking about insulation for your building, to survey the condition of the surface before. So if you've got any repair that's needed, any damp issues, you really don't want to be installing insulation on any damp surfaces because you're essentially going to be trapping that moisture and causing fabric problems. And if you are in a conservation area or you are in a historic building, a heritage building, you'll probably have traditional materials being used that are particular for that area. It's good to make sure that any kind of insulation works takes that into account and uses appropriate materials. You don't want to be plonking kind of modern materials on traditional materials. And a good thing to do if you are in a building like this is to make sure that whatever contractor you use understands the sort of local materials, the local buildings. Yeah, finding somebody locally is a good route for that. Ventilation is really important and should be considered as part of any retrofit work. It's important, particularly when you're modifying the fabric of the building. It's important for things like moisture management and the health of the indoor air. Fundamentally, you want to decrease the level of unwanted moisture coming in through drafts, for example, leaky roof or poorly fitted or old windows and doors, and increase the amount of moisture that you're deliberately ventilating out to a level that suits the building's demands. So this is especially important in community spaces where lots of people gather and like exercise indoors. So yeah, any kind of exercise classes you have or yoga and things like that, it builds up quite a lot of moisture. So you want to make sure that you're ventilating that out. Ventilation could be a simple matter of just opening the windows, so sort of natural ventilation. Or you might think about installing things like extractor fans, trickle vents in windows. If you might want to consider, especially if you're kind of thinking about replacing your heating system, something called a mechanical ventilation with heat recovery system, or MVHR. Not going to go into a huge amount of detail on that, but there's lots of information about it on our website if you are interested. And that's just a way to sort of have that ventilation system more embedded in the building, as well as provide some heat. So yeah, this is just really important to consider as part of any project where you're improving the building, just to make sure that you're providing healthy air for the users. So then heating and hot water systems, there's lots of different options available for community buildings. You probably are starting to hear a lot more about heat pumps. This is a low carbon form of heating. There's different types. You can get some that connect to sort of wet central heating systems as you would have a gas boiler, but you can also get ones that connect to dry heating, so kind of through vents, and they can double up as aircon in the summer. So that might be an option if you've got a smaller space and you kind of deal with a lot of overheating in the summer. Direct electric heating, like infrared heaters, are something that we kind of see a lot of in community buildings, and they can be really helpful if you've got a really large space or you've got a space that's used for multiple uses. So things like sports halls, churches, large high spaces, as this provides more direct heat, so you don't have to kind of heat the whole space. We also see in community buildings things like air curtains. So that's like the picture at the bottom there, that provides heat above doorways. That's definitely an approach that might be appropriate, particularly if you've got a building where people are coming and going quite a lot. Modern storage heaters as well, they can be really efficient heating type nowadays. If you do have a gas boiler ready and that works for you, then that's fine to continue with that, just making sure that it's serviced regularly and operating efficiently. For hot water, your options will really just depend on how much water you need, how long you need it for, and what you use it for. Community buildings that we work with tend to not really need a lot of stored water, so things like instant water heaters may be appropriate for those types of buildings. With any heating system, it's just really crucial to understand what you already have and how it works, and make sure it's set up in a way that's suitable for your needs and the multiple needs of the people that are using your community building. Make sure that somebody knows how to use it. If you've got a relatively simple setup, but a setup that requires making sure that controls are being changed throughout the day and things like that, it's a good idea to make sure multiple people know how to use those, so that you haven't got people sort of changing the controls that they shouldn't, or people just constantly trying to find that one person to help them. However, if you do have a really complex system, and one that's sort of automated, it's important to make sure that you've got like one person who has that expertise. If you have a gas boiler, as I mentioned, it's important to get that serviced regularly. Any heating system should be serviced regularly to make sure it's performing well. Generally, if you're able to avoid too many or overcomplicated controls, it's probably a good idea. And make sure that your heating actually matches when you need it. So there's a lot of buildings that, we see the heating is coming on when no one's in there, and that's just using a lot of energy and wasting it, and also costing a lot of money. With heating, I think it's a good idea to get bespoke advice from a heating engineer, particularly if you've got a really complicated building, or you're looking to sort of install a whole new system. Heating controls are generally really important to get right in community buildings, particularly as you may need different levels of heat in different places. In some multi-use buildings, a full building management system might be an appropriate route to take, but it's generally better for more complex uses and more complex buildings. And they do require a lot of expertise to sort of fine-tune it and understand it. So it's good to get some advice around that. As a minimum, though, you might already have, or you might think about getting some kind of programmers and timers and thermostats, and use those to adjust the sort of heat in different spaces at different times of the day. It might be worth considering getting smart controls that you can control via a smartphone or a tablet, and this can help to have better control of where the heat is coming on throughout the day and coming off. And finally is renewable energy. So that's the tip of the energy hierarchy. So as we've mentioned before, it's a really good idea to reduce the energy use first, and then increase the building's efficiency through repairs and maintenance and fabric measures before considering renewables. But it's a great idea to consider renewables because they can help really reduce your carbon footprint, but they can also really help with reducing your running costs. Solar PV is very common and a good way for community buildings to reduce their running costs, as it stops them relying on expensive electricity from the grid, particularly if the building is used mostly in the daytime. Combined with a heat pump as well, that can work really well to reduce the carbon footprint of the building. Solar thermal is something that we also see, and it's less common in community buildings because it's more for organizations that require significant hot water usage, but it does exist, and we do have information about solar thermal on our website if you're interested. For any solar project, you'll need to consider any planning restrictions, particularly if your building is in a conservation area or if it's a listed building. You'll also need to have a suitable roof. So if you get a sort of survey done, a contractor will look at your roof in terms of its condition for actually fitting the panels on, and it's also exposure to sunlight to make sure it's getting enough sunlight to generate what you need to power your building. There is a great opportunity for solar projects to engage the community. So a lot of community buildings might have display panels when they have solar installations, which show how much power is being generated and how much CO2 is being saved. it's a good idea to sort of engage local school groups or scout groups or people just in that project to educate around renewables, carbon footprints, and climate action. If you're interested about getting solar energy or you just want to sort of scope out the potential, CSE have created a tool called Solar Wizard, and you can go on it, just pop your postcode in, find your building, if there is the data for it in the tool. And you can use this to get a quick overview of the cost and potential impact of getting solar PV. If you already have solar panels, fantastic. That's great news. Hopefully they're working for you. Here's a few kind of tips to make the most out of your solar panels. So it's generally a good rule of thumb to use as much of that electricity as you can on site, then selling to the grid. So those who have solar panels will probably know, or those who are thinking about getting them, that you can sell your electricity back to the grid, and you get something called the Smart Export Guarantee that pays you for that. But what you get paid for it is not that generous compared to the savings that you can make for using your electricity generated from the solar panels instead of paying for grid electricity. So something to bear in mind is just making sure that you're, where possible, using that electricity. So things like using appliances in the day. It's good because community buildings do tend to operate a lot in the daytime. So they're good buildings to have solar panels. If you feel like there is some excess electricity that's being generated, you might consider getting something called a solar diverter, which can turn it into hot water, which can then go into a heating system or be used as hot water in the building. If you are generating a lot more than you use, you could explore getting a battery, as this could provide electricity when the sun isn't shining, backup power if you in an area that has a lot of grid outages. But they're not always appropriate. So I think it's just a matter of getting advice around that and understanding whether the sort of benefits outweigh the costs. So batteries do cost a fair bit, and they also have quite a lot of embodied carbon involved as well. Might not be appropriate, but for some buildings that generate a lot of electricity and maybe have a lot of activities happening in the evening, it might be a good idea. You'll also need to make sure that your panels are getting cleaned regularly and maintained to make sure that they are performing at their best. So I popped a link here. We've got a page and a fact sheet on making the most of your solar panels, so you can read up more about that. So finally, before I hand over to Tom, I just wanted to cover a bit on sort of finding support and funding. So in terms of finding a contractor, we get a lot of questions from community buildings around this. So particularly if you are a sort of older building, a traditional building, it's really important to make sure the contractor has the appropriate skills and experience needed. So definitely asking around locally for recommendations. You also could look into searching kind of national registers for accredited contractors for the particular work you're looking for. And sort of looking, when you do find some contractors, looking at other jobs they have completed. It's a good idea if they've worked with community buildings that might be similar to yours, and asking about what kind of training and qualifications they have. So we've popped a few places you could look to find contractors here. So Federation of Master Builders is UK's largest trade association in the building sector. The Green Register as well is a not-for-profit that trains professionals in building sustainable buildings, and they have a register as well of professionals that you can have a look at. Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, as well as a professional body for surveyors. And then the Microgeneration Certification Scheme is a bit of a mouthful. That is really useful because they are the certification body for any low carbon energy technologies and contractors. So if you're thinking about installing a heat pump or solar project, it's a good idea to take a look at their installers. If you're interested in getting information and advice and support, or finding a heating engineer that is trained up in heat pumps, HeatGeek is a good source for that too. And in terms of funding, as you're probably all aware, is definitely a complex beast, constantly changing. So here's a few that we know of. Some of them might be finishing, some of them might start up again. Acre, which supports the sort of village halls in England, they had a grant. I think it's just about to finish or maybe has finished, but they might run it again for village halls for energy improvements. There's a couple options that provide a mix of loans and grants, such as the Energy Resilience Fund and Big Issue Invest for community spaces. It's a good idea to consider part grant, part loans. The grant can help you to reduce your energy costs and then increase your ability to sell your spaces within the community building, meaning that a loan might be easier than to pay off. It's definitely a sort of mechanism that we are seeing. It will depend obviously on the sort of conditions and the criteria for the loans, but it might be a good route. Definitely seen local councils offer funding for community spaces, so check that out if you haven't already. And then there's a few that are focused on like heritage buildings or historic buildings, and particularly for like repairs. So Architectural Heritage Fund and Historic England are options. There's a couple government programs that offer funding in Scotland and Wales for community spaces. So the CARES Community Buildings Fund in Scotland, Community Facilities Programme in Wales. And then something which yeah, we're really kind of keen to highlight is if there are like commercial or community renewable projects in your area, there might be community benefit funds coming from that. So that's the sort of profits that are generated by those projects might be put into a fund for communities locally. So one that CSE actually run for Thrive Renewables, which is a renewable company. They have a number of wind farms across the, I want to say England and Scotland. I'm not sure if they cover Wales or Northern Ireland. They might do, but we support, we administer their community benefit fund, which is for community buildings within proximity of those wind farms. So yeah, there's a link there. I think we're going to be launching a new round soon-ish. So maybe take a look at that. And other options are community finance, so thinking about raising funds locally for crowdfunding, or if you're working with a community energy group, you might be able to access sort of their kind of community energy share offer mechanisms. And then if you are a church, there's some options for kind of support and potentially funding through organisations like National Churches Trust or National Lottery Heritage Fund. And finally, before I hand over to our first speaker, and this is something we really want to emphasize as part of the Energy Learning Network, is this opportunity to collaborate with community energy groups. So for those of you who don't know what community energy is, they are social enterprises, community organizations that are set up to deliver local energy projects that are owned or part owned by the community and deliver benefits for those communities. So because of this, they're probably better aligned with your values as community organizations. So they're good to work with rather than going to potentially like more kind of commercial consultancies or contractors or people like that. Not all community energy groups will work in the sort of retrofit space, although some do. And those who do, they might be able to provide impartial advice and guidance there to help you. Some might provide audits and support with funding, whether that's through their own funding mechanisms or help you to identify other funding sources. And they might also work with sort of trusted contractors that they can help you to access. If you're interested in this as a route, the first thing to do is just to find out what community energy organisations are in your area. And some of them operate across a larger area, some of them in a more kind of specific location. Doing a Google search or maybe going through our Energy Learning Network partners. So Community Energy England has like a map and you can look at their members through that. And Community Energy Scotland and Wales will have their memberships as well. And then Action Renewables in Northern Ireland, it might be worth getting in touch with them too if you're based there. So that's me done for my bit. I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, Tom, if you're okay and you're there.
Yes, thanks,
Hi.
Megan. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. All right, I'll get stuck in. Good morning, folks. I am here today to talk to you about how we transformed a building that became an energy black hole into the island's first net zero building. My name is Tom Lusink. I live on the Isle of Raasay and I also work with the community on the island of Raasay as part of a project to make the island net zero by 2040. For a little bit of context, assuming that you haven't heard of Raasay, it is a little island in the Inner Hebrides off the northwest of Scotland, and we have a population of around 200 in the winter. We have a hyperoceanic climate, which is just jargon to say that it's extremely wet and windy here. We're an isolated island and we rely on a ferry service to connect us to the mainland. The hole that you can see here, quite striking. It was built in 2009 and even won architectural awards at the time. It's the island's only community hub and is used sort of from everything from electrical poles to um, ceilidhs to bagpiping competitions to community lunches, sort of anything the community needs. However, when we moved into our new offices there about 3 years ago, it was a very sad sight. Looking a bit more like the bottom left picture, it was run down and decrepit. There was an old marquee propping up a full and open door and a block open, holding another one. And yeah, the ground source heat pump, it had failed, which was the building's heat supply. And it was now running up on a backup immersion, which is a direct electric system. And it was hugely expensive, thousands every month just to keep the building warm. And yeah, this was at a time where we were just recovering from COVID as well. And as many of you know, it's run by a volunteer board whose capacity just basically, didn't have the capacity to deal with this. Can we go to the next slide, please, Megan? Thank you. So as part of the project, we decided the building would be one of our first action points. The building had become a burden to the community. And so we thought we'll fix it. But in doing so, it was part of our philosophy to make sure it doesn't become a burden again and will give back more than it took. So yeah, we want to make it as efficient as possible to reduce its carbon footprint while being as affordable as possible, which goes hand in hand. So we wanted to fix the heating system, replace the leaking doors, and install a renewable source to power the electrical heating system. Next slide, please. So how we went about it, yeah, it didn't go to plan. You'd be disappointed if it did. And yeah, a lot of things changed along the way. So this started in July 2023, and our first port of call was to repair the heat pump. This proved to be extremely challenging as the funding and suppliers both wanted to replace and not repair. Uh, Although this just went against the whole ethos of what we were trying to do. So after quite a lot of perseverance, we found the money and we found the contractor to repair the ground source heat pump that was already installed. The following February, again, following much searching and learning a lot more than I ever could have dreamed of about the requirements for sports hall doors, we had shiny new bulletproof grade glass doors installed to keep the wind and the water out and the footballs and the basketballs in. While this was going on, we were working with CARES funding to fund a renewable installation on the roof, namely a solar PV. Initially, it was extremely challenging to get a supplier to quote for us, even one quote given our location. So against usual good practice, initially we only were able to get one quote. As time elapsed and the funding application finally came through, we renewed the quote. And by this stage, I think the supplier had second thoughts about working a RASA and essentially priced us out. And so sort of put the whole project in jeopardy as we only had now a couple months to use this funding before it would expire. So yes, after all this work, we thought we're back to square one, though thankfully I had done a bit of redundancy research and had some backup contractors on the line. So we went out to these contractors and now we're all of a sudden able to get three contractors. This goes to show how much the landscape can change. Um, and these quotes were now coming in significantly cheaper than the original quote. So all of a sudden we had a chance actually to increase the capacity of the system as we had hopes in the long run to install EV chargers. It was all looking fine and rosy. And then 1 week before our installation, we finally got the drawings from the contractors, and we had a structural engineer look over the drawings and basically find that the fixing system wasn't up to job. Even though the contractors who were accredited were adamant it's fine. A lot of back and forth, and eventually we found a system that worked. So at the end of February, we had a 30 kilowatt solar system installed, and yes, and while we do get our share of rain, it does shine actually a fair bit here, and the panels have been really efficient. So next slide, please. So where are we now? Well, the building is now net zero. It consumes less energy in a year than it produces. So that's a huge win, and that also translates to huge energy savings. Like Megan said, you're much better trying to use it than sell it because you get peanuts for selling it. So we're looking to maximize that and install an EV charger. There have been some teething issues, though so far there's been good aftercare from the solar company. However, I do have concerns about this going forward because what happens if and when they go bust? So on top of all these savings, the building is now also energy independent. It can run independently from the grid. And so in a power cut, which is not that rare for us, the building's actually now our resilience hub, and can basically keep people warm and supply everything that we need. So really, it's gone from a decrepit energy black hole back to the thriving uh, community hub it once was. So very quickly ending on key lessons. What did we learn? Where, firstly, I'd say the question is, where do we need to outsource skills? What skills do we not have, and what do we need to find out? We early on identified that we had an unusual roof design. We got involved with a structural engineer, and this just proved invaluable. It cost us a few hundred, in the short run, but in the long run, probably cost or saved us savings or thousands, saved us thousands. And yeah, those skills might exist in your community. Be really clear about what you want. Funding constantly tried to get us to go elsewhere because the funding did not necessarily match what was actually the best option for what worked for us. Um, and again, this applies also to go into contractors. I think being really clear about what it is you're after before going to contractors. Of course, seek advice from them, but just because they're doing it doesn't necessarily also mean that they're the be all and end all experts. And I was actually quite shocked at sometimes the lack of expertise and knowledge by some of these accredited contractors. Um, we were very fortunate that we had the Greater Carbon Neutral Islands project as clout, so we were able to leverage a good deal. But you might find in some other way, if you have any way to leverage that, you might be able to have further work, basically to bargain with the contractors. We went with the biggest and cheapest contractor. In hindsight, going for a smaller contract with more expertise probably would have cost slightly more, but could be a better option. And often funders will want the most competitive quote, but it's also the most competitive quote that's the best option for your project. And in working with contractors, I'd say a more important metric is how long they've been going for, not just how many installations they've done. Um, the real test of how good their work is, particularly with things like solar panels, will be in 10, 15 years. So they might have done a lot of it in the last few years, but that doesn't necessarily say there's proof in the pudding. And I would say you use all available tools. I'm not a solar expert. However, I did use AI and told it and it helped me review solar proposals and pulled out all sorts of things that I just would not have basically known about, including that, our inverter could get a 10-year warranty instead of a 5. And I brought these back to the contractor and said, could we have a 10-year warranty? And we got it. So I think, use the tools that are out there. And yeah, ending on sort of a reality check. It was a lot of work. This was spanned a few years. I have the fortunate position that this was part of my paid job. Um, and it's absolutely well worth doing, but it's a lot of work. Um, and really, yeah, well, I'll just close and saying, like, really, my view, I think this building is a miracle worker. It's, you know, it takes energy from the sun and uses that to power extracting heat from the ground and offers that to the community. So I think if you can, it's absolutely well worth doing. And yeah, that's really the end of my presentation. I'm happy to share technical details and sort of more like explicit details on funding and how we actually funded about it in the follow-up materials. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. That was really great. I'm sure there'll be some questions in the chat and we'll come back to them when we get to the Q&A. But I'm going to hand straight over to Sue. Sue, are you with us?
I am, yeah.
Hey, Sue.
Hello. Hi,
Hi.
everyone. Very inspiring, Tom. Thoroughly enjoyed that. In fact, I'd like to now move there. We are Caxton House Community Centre. We're in Archway in Islington in North London. We've got a purpose-built building that was built in the 70s. And just a little bit of background on what we do. We run a whole range of projects, about 34 projects a week, that support our local communities. Everything from under 5 stay and play to elders things and sports and archery and an aerial yoga program for teenagers, a whole range of things. Very busy. We're open 7 days a week. We also have 17 offices, so we have 6 groups that are co-located in the building who provide additional services to the area and from within our centre as well. We started working, well, in 2009, we installed solar panels. These are now obviously they're very different to the ones that you can get these days, but they still work, and we still generate some power from them. And I'll talk a bit later on about our plans for those. But we began working with Power Up North London in 2018. And they are a community benefit society, and they support energy efficiency solutions for groups and schools and individuals, and they talked to us about installing LEDs throughout the centre and managed to get funding for that. So we were quite excited. That was kind of the start of our retrofit journey, if you like. Our trustees were very much on board about retrofitting and decarbonising. So that was an easy win for us, because I knew I had the backing of our trustees. And once I've got that, everything else is just a question of making it happen, really. We also, in 2019, we had installed, we've got all our kitchen was revamped through some funding, and that gave us the opportunity to put in new energy efficient appliances in there. We improved our green spaces and started food growing in our back gardens and side gardens. So there was quite a lot of small things that were happening, but it was interesting hearing Megan say that the fabric first approach can be controversial, because I didn't realize that. We took a fabric first approach, and we looked at everything that we had, everything in the building that we could improve before we went to the more extreme measures. And you know, we had windows that were very, very drafty. We had double glazing on the first floor, single glazing on the ground floor, the original 1970s windows on the ground floor, some of which were plastic. Second floor we had, first floor we had double glaze, but the double glazing had failed, and it was impossible to repair any of these, despite our best efforts to try to do so. So we were very fortunate to get funding to replace. We've replaced 54 double windows through and skylights throughout the building with triple glazed, and they're wood. So you know, we felt we did quite a lot of research to make sure that we were looking at solutions that would work for the building as well as the area, as well as maintaining what we wanted to do for the centre. And so we were fortunate to do that. And we also draft proofed all of our external doors. The building already had insulation. So we felt we had gone as far as we could with our sort of fabric first approach and done as much as we could to then be able to measure the changes that made, but also having an audit now that would give us ideas about where we could move forward with retrofitting further. In terms of the funding, it's a minefield out there. You know, there are so many different funds that are available, but the amounts that you can get, the number of people applying for these funds now is huge. We were quite fortunate. We submitted 11 funding applications altogether between Power Up North London and ourselves, and we were successful with 8. So we got a substantial amount of money in order to do this next level that we moved to. So in 2021, we had the windows installed, and then in 2022 and 23, we were working on installing an air source heat pump, which was the next stage following the energy audit that we had done. We were also able to raise funds for 6 zones where we were going to install mechanical ventilation with heat recovery units that would be perfect for some of our communal areas or some of our multi-use areas in order to improve the air quality in there, but also it would improve the efficiency of the airflow in the building itself. Like Tom was saying, things did not always go to plan, and we found that the zone or the area that we had identified where the air source heat pump was apparently going to be perfectly placed then wasn't suitable because of the advice that we'd been given by the installers. And so then we found a second location, which I felt was totally inappropriate because there were lots of tree roots there. And I didn't think that that would work with a concrete base. And sure enough, that wasn't suitable. We also had to have as an audit for the sound levels, because although we're on a really busy main road, it seems that the place that we had identified finally to install the air source heat pump was going to end up being 2 decibels over the permitted allowance at night, only when the pump was running at 100%. So it was going lorries and buses and everything, you know, trundling past, and the nearest house is quite a way away on the opposite side. But, you know, this 2 decibels meant that we had to install an acoustic unit. Otherwise, we would not have had planning permission, which was a further 70, which is a monster of a thing that's 3 meters tall, and therefore would have blocked out the lights into some of the ground floor offices. So we had to find a 4th area where we could install the heat pump, and submit a second planning permission in order for that to happen. One of the things I would say is, if you are applying for planning permission for something like this, increase your boundary area that you put into your funding application, your planning application, because if we had done that, the pump, we have literally moved it something like 5 meters along. And if we had just included the whole area in the boundary, we would have been able to keep that original planning permission and just make an adjustment to it. But that's not what we did. So we had to then wait a further 8 weeks for permission. And by then, the pump was delivered, but we didn't have the permission and we didn't have the area ready to receive it. We had to put a concrete plinth down that hadn't been put in yet, and so we had to keep it somewhere. This thing weighs 480 kilos, so we couldn't just move it ourselves. We had to get a crane to lift over the roof in order to install. Anyway, it was a lot of nonsense. So these are things that, had we known, we would have done differently. And but eventually we did have the air source heat pump installed with a huge acoustic unit over it, but it did mean an additional £17,000 that we hadn't budgeted for. We had a really good relationship with all our funders, and they were prepared to allow us to reduce the number of mechanical ventilation units. Instead of installing 6, we installed 5, and used the additional funding to support the acoustic unit. So it's really important that you have a good relationship with all of your funders, because most of them, they want you to succeed, and they expect changes. So as long as you're keeping in contact with them, you can usually change things around as you need to, you know. So since then, we have been monitoring our, well, we have a decarbonisation timeline. I think the next slide, Megan, might be our timeline. Yeah, so it just sort of shows you the different things that we've been doing since 2009 up to date. And after the installation of the air source heat pump and the MVHRs, we wanted to work on changing the behaviour in the building. So we have 6 other groups that we rent office space to, and some of them plug in electric radiators. And, you know, it was really important that we've been working with them throughout the process, but we also wanted to encourage a change in behaviour, so that the groups in the building are much more aware of what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it, and how they can support and buy into all of that. We have a massive display in our reception that people can come and read and ask questions about. And we did, when we installed the air source heat pump, we didn't take into consideration our large sports hall. And that was because it's got very high ceilings, and it would have meant that instead of installing a 50 kilowatt heat pump, we would have had to install a 72 kilowatt heat pump, which would have been incredibly expensive. So we decided that we would find an alternative heating solution for the main hall. However, last winter we were able to include the main hall in the whole heating of the building. So we're now sort of thinking maybe that's not quite as necessary as we thought it would be. And we've spent the last 12 months monitoring data in the building. So we've got loggers all over the place. And at any point we can look at the temperature of any given space, which has given us a lot of information about where we need to make radiator changes. So we don't need to change the radiators in all the building, but there are a few areas where changing the radiators to those that will work at a lower energy, a lower output, are going to be necessary. And at the moment we've identified 9, so that's not terrible. But we also have noticed that in a couple of spaces, we just cannot get the temperature up to what we consider to be reasonable. And we think that that's because the insulation may have failed in one of the offices has 2 external walls. And we think that maybe we need to improve the insulation in that. So that's moving forward, that's another thing that we'll be doing. And moving forward, we're looking at moving our old solar panels to the back roof and installing 72 ones in the place of where the old ones used to be. And those ones would be 455 wattage, whereas the other ones are only 162 and very old now. So we're hoping that will help a lot. We're going to upgrade our heat exchanger, so that should help improve the temperature that we're losing at the moment. So that should help a bit. And then the question mark is over whether we change the heating in the main hall to an electric heating, or whether we just keep it running on the existing system. We haven't decided on a building management system yet. We have zonal heating, and we might just improve that. So that's the next part of what we're planning to do. I would say that it's tricky to be able to quantify the savings, because the fluctuation in energy costs has changed so much since we started. And at one point we had a deal with an energy company that our gas was 3.2 pence per kilowatt hour, and that went to 32.56. So we went from spending £5,000 on our gas to £50,000 for exactly the same usage, which was a part of the influence in installing an air source heat pump. We haven't removed our gas boiler yet. It still has a lot of life in it, and we don't want to remove that while it still has its use. But once that boiler gets old or is no longer of use, then we will decommission that completely. What else? We have yeah, you'll see there's a monster of a beast on the bottom right of the acoustic unit that had to go over the actual pump. And you'll see from the top left where our solar panels are on the front roof. We'll move those to the back roof and install new ones. And if we go to the next slide, we started off in 2018. Our carbon timeline was 44 tonnes, and the last measurement that we did at the end of 2024, we were under 8 tonnes of carbon. So we've made significant savings, and we obviously hope to improve on that with the new plans that we have, or funding permitting, the new plans that we have to carry on with this work. We did put together a lessons learnt document, because we work with a lot of other community centres and voluntary groups who run their own buildings, and this is just a summary of the lessons learned. There is there's a larger document, but there were some really important things that we found. We didn't have, I hadn't factored into the funding somebody to run the project, for example, so I did all of that along with the support from Power Up North London. And I've already mentioned local planning rules, and making sure that the people that you bring in, we had a lot of support through Power Up North London from pro bono work for the funding for the planning application and the acoustic reports that we needed. A lot of energy groups will have pro bono support that you can tap into. So get in touch with your local energy groups, because they will be able to help you in a lot of ways. I mean, my knowledge before I started working with Power Up North London was negligible. So yeah, it's been quite a learning curve. And obviously, if you have any questions, I'm happy to, once we get to Q&A. I think I've gone over. I try and keep it short, but it never is.
Thanks, Dee. That's really helpful. Thanks. It's a lot of detail that I think is really important to know. And yeah, if anyone needs to read the lessons learnt report, we'll include that in the follow-up email for those who haven't seen it. Okay, so we'll go to questions. Lucy, do you want to field some questions? I know that the chat has a lot of activity in it.
Yeah, too many questions, a few comments from people as well, helpful advice and stuff. Earlier on, Martin Carr was asking about solar panels and wondering whether they were self-cleaning when it rains.
I think that's probably a level of technical knowledge about solar panels that I don't know. Maybe Tom or Sue would know, and maybe there's some types that are.
For us, we have an advanced self-cleaning system, which is the form of it's very windy here. And I've seen so far they look like they have been getting like pretty clean just from basically having really vigorous wet and rain. But we will be planning to, they're not self-cleaning as such, so there will have to be a cleaning protocol if that isn't up to scratch.
Yeah,
ours are not self-cleaning, definitely not, but I have no idea whether the new ones might be, so that's definitely something that I'd want to look into too.
Yeah, it's a good idea to maybe, once you start looking at contractors, what types of panels they offer, and what the options are. Great, thanks, Lucy. Next question.
Yeah, talking about, oh, Sarah put a comment in about Historic England had updated advice on renewables and conservation areas. So she posted a link in the chat,
Great.
which I think we've got somewhere on our website as well, probably. And then there were some questions around funding. So Marta commented that a lot of those funding programs require match funding, which is frequently a stumbling block. And then Tim Humphreys talked about being careful about what he called finishing funders. So you need all of the project costs available, with the balance being sought to complete your budget from such funders. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Sue and Tom have anything to say about funding, but from our experience working with community buildings, we often see sort of a project using multiple sources of funding and sort of match funding. We've definitely run funds for on behalf of funders where they have asked about match funding, and it does help applications, but isn't always necessarily the sort of big criteria, I guess. Like, we wouldn't necessarily not fund community buildings if they don't have match funding, but it really just depends on the funder. So definitely worth kind of asking around for that. Tom and Sue, do you guys have anything to kind of touch on in terms of like your funding and how that worked? Was that sort of using like multiple sources?
Yeah, we did use multiple sources, and it was a leap of faith a little bit when you start, because between our Windows air source heat pump and NVHRs came to 300,000. And there was no way we were ever going to be able to get that from one funder. So it was literally a leap of faith, hoping that we could follow this process through. We were successful with funding some small pots from various small funders, but essentially the bigger fund came from Islington Community Energy Fund. So your local council may have a community energy fund, and we have another London Community Energy Fund. So you may have a borough or county-wide fund that is similar. I also applied to BIFA, who fund community and environmental projects if you're based within 10 miles of landfill sites. Now, I don't know whether their funding is still the same, but we were able to access £70,000 from BIFA, and of which we had to generate 10% from a third party. We were not allowed to put that in ourselves. It had to be a third party. But one of our other funders supported that by saying, well, 10%, that 10% that they would take out of the grant that they were going to give us, and tell BIFA that they had okayed that. So we were very fortunate. We were turned down by a few, but we were quite fortunate to be able to mix and match in order to get most of it covered.
Thanks, Sue. I think we should go to the next question, just to know that there's quite a few to get through. Lucy?
Yeah, there's some more coming in. Yeah, so Charles Foreman asked, could you say a bit more about heat exchange as something that Sue mentioned?
Yes, Sue, are you able to tell us a bit more about the mechanical ventilation heat recovery system that you guys have?
Couldn't get myself off mute, sorry about that. Well, the heat exchanger is the one in the boiler room that essentially, I mean, I'm not particularly technical, but my understanding is that it's where the hot water goes through the heat exchange, it passes through in order to then go into our heating system, and it has a number of panels on it, and we believe, or the volunteer engineer that we're working with believes, that by increasing the number of panels on the heat exchanger, we will be able to it's at the moment it's losing heat from one side of the pipework to the other as it goes through the heat exchanger, and I think it's 3 degrees. So we're trying to stop that from happening. And the idea is that by adding more, by upgrading the heat exchanger, we will be able to not lose that 3 degrees. That's my understanding, but I'm not technical enough to know what the ins and outs of that are. But I'm happy for anybody to send me a question, and our volunteer engineer John will be more than happy to get in touch and give any advice, because he loves talking about this.
You find yourself a real nerd to work
But
with.
the NVHRs, essentially, in what I understand to be layman's terms, are that they use the heat in the building already. So there's an extraction part and an input part. They extract the heat, the air that's already there. They use the heat from the warmth that is already in the room to heat the clean, more pure air that's going back into the room. And so you get that heat, that you're reusing the heat that's already in the room. So in essence, you don't need to have your heat as high in the room, because that will circulate. And I think it comes back into the room at about 0.5 degree lower than it left. So you're not losing too much, and they're very, very cheap to run. Somebody said to me it's about the same as charging a mobile phone. So you're getting much better air quality, and you're cutting down on your heating usage. One of the groups that we work with, one of their staff members has terrible asthma, hay fever every summer, and since we've installed this in their office, she never has hay fever at work. So it's made a significant difference to her and to some of the groups that we work with for exercise classes and things like that.
Cool. Thank you. Any other questions, DC? I think we probably have time for maybe a couple more.
Yeah, one more question from Ollie Bacini. I probably said that wrong. Is a community energy project viable for a roof scale solar PV installation on a community building, which may only generate 20 to 30,000 kilowatt hours per year? A lot of these schemes seem to be larger ground mounted arrays.
There's definitely community energy schemes that exist with rooftop solar. I think it depends on a number of things. It depends on sort of amounts that can be used on site. They would essentially work, as far as I understand it, by the community energy group essentially charging the building a certain amount to pay for that electricity. And it definitely does exist. I think it's probably worth, if you have got an existing community energy group that you could get in touch with locally or in the region that maybe done something similar, and kind of seeing how financially that stacks up for them and if it's feasible. Before kind of any investable case is made, there would be a survey done and to look at and to actually sort of design the whole system to see if that works financially. But yeah, I mean, I've definitely seen it existing. So if you're based in England, having a look at the community energy map would be really helpful to sort of establish whether other projects like that exist. But yeah, I mean, CSE are more than happy to help kind of connect you to community energy groups if you want to get in touch with us to discuss that opportunity further.
Okay. We've got time for another one.
Probably just one more, and then we'll have to probably take some questions away.
Yeah, so Tim Humphreys asks, do you have experience of air-to-air heat pumps as opposed to air-to-water, and their pros and cons?
Yeah, so I'm not a heating engineer, but what I'm aware of is that they are better for smaller spaces. So they're in a residential context, they are more appropriate for like sort of smaller homes and flats. The pros of them is that they can generate cool air as well in the summer, which is becoming more and more important. But they're not always appropriate, particularly if you've got kind of a large area to heat. And if you have a sort of wet central heating system already, it might be a good idea to sort of use that system and the radiators and the pipe work for a heat pump rather than going to an air-to-air. We have got some information on our website about air-to-air heat pumps. If it's something that you think might be appropriate for you, taking a look at the Heat Geek website for information about it and seeing if you can find some kind of bespoke advice would probably be a good route to take. Great. Okay. We'll probably, oh, it's 52. I think we can probably go to 55, Lucy, if we want to take one more question. Oh, you're on mute.
Just checking through the chat again. I think there's quite a few people posting helpful comments. So the comment about National Lottery Heritage Fund can provide 100% of funding for projects up to 250k, but the levels of competition are so high currently that you'd need good match funding to make a competitive application. And then Tim Humphrey says, I'm not sure if that was in response to Ollie's question, but if you're looking at an integrated energy solution as we're planning for our village hall, be careful which aspect of the work scope you allocate to specific funders. Some have criteria that may mean you target mechanical ventilation heat recovery as opposed to solar PVs to keep funding options open.
That's a good point. I think like really understanding the lay of the land when it comes to funders and what they fund is important, and kind of like having those important dialogues with them early on. Yeah, definitely key. So thanks for that tip. Great. Okay. Well, thanks for everyone for sharing kind of resources and tips in the chat. It's really helpful to see all of you supporting each other. Lucy, if I could just ask you to mute again. I think there's quite a bit of background noise
sorry.
in the office. Thank you. We're going to wrap up now. So if there's any unanswered questions, me and Lucy will take them away and we'll include in a follow-up responses to those. If Sue and Tom are happy to share their emails, then we can include that in the follow-up email or pop them in the chat here if you've got any questions for them. I just want to end with kind of 3 key takeaways. So one is just like understanding your building first and sort of yeah, just getting a real good picture of where you're starting from. Mentioned this so many times, but don't underestimate repair and maintenance. Like, yeah, it's super fab. I love seeing these examples of new systems being installed, and those are really important in the whole retrofit world. But yeah, think about the sort of repair and maintenance aspect as well when you're thinking about your building. And lastly, getting support. So as both Tom and Sue mentioned, like getting bespoke advice. Some contractors may not have the experience that they say they have, so asking around, getting advice from specialists is really important. Working with community energy groups if you can, or other kind of specialist organisations to help navigate quite a complex topic will be helpful for you. In terms of sort of where to go for further advice and support, so CSE do have a number of resources on community buildings. We also have started to offer energy audits for community buildings, I think just in England, so apologies to any Scottish or Welsh groups or groups in Northern Ireland. This is a paid for service, so definitely take a look at that. That could be a useful starting point to explore options for you. We have a number of videos on things like heat pump, solar PV and building fabric, and we've got a retrofit training series and also in-depth training slides on retrofit for community buildings. So it's all linked there, and you'll get a copy of the slides so you can follow those links. There's a useful kind of retrofit your community building guide, very, very simple one that we developed with Local Trust, that's linked there. If you want to sort of receive training yourself or get advice, particularly on like historic buildings, the Tywee Centre offers really good training courses on retrofit of historic buildings and just general retrofit knowledge. To be honest, they're really great, and we've used their training quite a lot. And they're based in Wales, but I think that they offer sort of training and support across the UK. And then for more kind of information on traditional buildings as well, the Sustainable Traditional Building Alliance has a number of useful resources on their website. So this is a sort of introductory webinar. We are planning on having a sort of reflection and networking session on the 7th of October. We do try to have these for all of our webinars as part of the Energy Learning Network, or CSE sort of delivery of the Energy Learning Network. And this is an opportunity to sort of come back in a month's time, kind of reflect on what you've learnt and how it can be applied to your work, and network with other like-minded organisations. Some of you have already started kind of sharing your kind of tips and resources and knowledge in the chat, which is really, really great to see. This is just another opportunity to do that in a bit more of a structured way. We will explore questions like what types of measures your community building might need, what are the barriers, who can support you, who's best to lead or be involved in the process, how you can bring your community along, and what are some kind of key next steps, and hopefully kind of generating that sort of peer-to-peer learning and support sort of atmosphere that we like to promote at CSE. So if you want to sign up for that, we will send a link in the follow-up email. There is a link in the slide there too. The next webinar that we'll also be delivering in November is on delivering energy advice in the community. So if you're interested in supporting local residents with energy advice and support, and sort of working towards that, or working with community energy groups to help you do that, we'll have a webinar about that in November. And just finally, if you could take just a couple minutes to fill out our feedback form from today. If I could, I don't know, Lucy, if you're able to share it in the chat, that would be helpful. But there's a QR code there as well that you can use to do it on your phone. And I'll leave this on, and feel free to do that now if you can, and we'll include it in the follow-up email. But with that, I will say thank you to everyone for joining today, and really big thanks to Sue and Tom for sharing your experiences as well. It's quite complex stuff, but hopefully really, really valuable for the community sector. So yeah, good luck with all your sort of journeys in your buildings. And thanks again, and hope to see you again soon. So I'll leave this up and running. Feel free to head off once you've clicked on that link for the feedback form. Thanks, everyone.